From Benoit's Cove, Newfoundland and Labrador, this is the Indy broadcast. On the federal election campaign trail, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre visits the Avalon, but it was what happened off-camera that has some concern for what a Conservative government would mean for press freedom. Newfoundland and Labrador Auditor General Denise Hanrahan releases a scathing report on the state of the province's personal care home program. And journalist Heidi Adder joins us from Labrador, where she's been covering a community-led effort to address a drug and overdose crisis in Shehajit. Those stories and more coming up. Welcome to the Indy broadcast for Saturday, April 5th. I'm Justin Brake. On Tuesday, federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre visited Petty Harbour on day 9 of the federal election campaign. He said a Conservative government would ramp up support for Newfoundland and Labrador's fossil fuel industries, double the government's funding for small craft harbours, and reverse marine protected areas established by the current Liberal government. But it was what happened off-camera before and after Poilievre's staged announcement that has one Newfoundland journalist concerned about what a Poilievre-led Conservative government would mean for press freedom in Canada. In a video published by CBC, you can see journalists scrumming former Deputy Premier and current Conservative candidate for the Avalon riding, Steve Kent. Sarah Smelly, a reporter for the Canadian Press, begins to ask Kent about a photo circulating online of him wearing a Donald Trump MAGA hat.
And I'm proud to be part of that team. Okay.
There's a picture of you going around on social media wearing a Make America Great hat.
Partway through her question, though, a Poilievre campaign staffer interrupts.
This event isn't open for questions, it's just for coverage, okay?
This event isn't open for questions. It's just for coverage, okay? Moments later, the same staffer appears to move a journalist who is trying to take photographs away from Poilievre and local Conservative candidates. Greg Locke, the veteran Newfoundland photojournalist in the video, wrote an article for Canadian Journalist describing Tuesday's events. He said a campaign staffer told journalists to, quote, sit in their cars until they were called, end quote, even though the event was being held on a public wharf. Locke said reporters were then ordered to move inside the local fish plant for the speech, as the campaign staffers had gender equality protesters removed from the wharf, using what Locke describes as threats. Locke said campaign staff got, quote-unquote, very aggressive with journalists. He goes on to describe Poilievre's bus arriving, when he says, quote, reporters were told to go stand on a doorstep 50 feet away. When they refused, a staffer attempted to block their way, to the point he raised his arms and pushed one photographer back, end quote. He was about to grab the photographer when others intervened. One witness said it looked like he was about to throw the photographer on the ground. Tuesday's incident comes amid widespread criticism of the Poilievre campaign's decision to ban journalists from traveling on Conservative campaign buses, a long-standing tradition in media coverage of elections. Locke says what happened Tuesday is a, quote, carefully contrived and controlled scene in a public space, stage-managed for the party photographer and video crew to get content for their ad campaigns. They don't want any real media present to ask questions or record anything off script. They don't want to answer questions from journalists or have any photos or video made that they cannot control or manipulate, end quote. In addition to the Poilievre campaign coming under fire for its treatment of journalists, the Conservatives are also dealing with fractures and tensions within the party, as Liberal support has grown in recent weeks, with the two parties now neck and neck in the polls. Also on Tuesday, Newfoundland and Labrador's Auditor General Denise Hanrahan released a scathing report on the state of the province's personal care home program. The investigation uncovered several shocking incidents, including a resident who was found dead after not returning from a routine walk, another resident with dementia who went missing during a walk, someone who was injured after falling down an embankment behind a home, and another person who was given multiple medications belonging to another resident and then who died as a result of accidental overdose. Personal care homes in the province house around 4,400 people in privately owned for-profit facilities, most of them seniors and other adults who need assistance with daily living. Hanrahan's investigation found the department had, quote, no internal written policies, procedures, or processes to handle serious incidents, end quote, and that 8 serious incidents were reported during the audit period of April 2022 to September 2024. Hanrahan says 6 of those 8 incidents had no documented follow-up action by the department. The report also highlighted significant problems with program delivery, licensing, resident care assessments, operational standards, oversight, and compliance. The Auditor General says the province's Department of Health has, quote, failed in its responsibilities to maintain modern operational standards, end quote, and that solutions to the same issues were put forth by the Auditor General's office in a 2015 report, but weren't implemented. On Thursday, opposition health critic Barry Pettin called for a police investigation into the alleged incidents in the report. CBC reported Thursday the RCMP could not confirm whether or not it was investigating or had already investigated the incidents, since the report didn't specify any dates or places where they allegedly occurred. Among the barrage of outrage in response to the report's findings, NAPE President Jerry Earle says the conditions outlined by the Auditor General are, quote, a reflection of the realities of privatization for a service that should be completely funded and managed by our public health authority. I spoke with Earle Wednesday. He joined us from St. John's.
I've always said, and NAPE have always said, that healthcare, any aspect of healthcare, should not be profit-driven. And then when I even drill into a certain aspect, which I was not aware, and NAPE was not aware of, the significant increase in funding of personal home care, when you go back from the fiscal year 22-23 to 23-24, there was a $33.8 million increase in funding. When you look at the time frame that this Auditor General report was on, not a whole lot of positive change. I know the frontline workers didn't see a whole lot of change. And so again, it goes back to the whole issue. You get what you pay. And unfortunately, there's a lot of issues where staff just don't have the appropriate training, even though they would want to have that training. And you going out and hiring people with particular training to work in these facilities. There's such a fragmented system. Our acute care and our long-term care, for the most part, is public. Once you step beyond that, whether it be personal care homes, home care, community care, it's either mostly for-profit agencies that operate this, or in some cases, not-for-profit, but primarily for-profit. You see, and again, it's a competition. It's a business model where they operate to make a profit. And I always say that the individuals that should be receiving the care, in this case we're talking about personal care home seniors, people with disabilities, they are not the primary objective here from what I hear from a number. Because again, when you go from one fiscal year to the next, and you see a $33.8 million increase, and I think the Auditor General I listened to this morning on another show talked about 90% of these facilities that is public funding is only 10% are really where the person is actually paying their own way. So again, this is public money, taxpayers' dollars that's going into private entities. It'd be great to have a private business where 90% of your income is automatically going to come in from the taxpayers in Newfoundland and Labrador. What we're not seeing from this report, the quality of service, the quality of care, and even something simple as this proper dietary needs being met. We're seeing all kinds of problems, and you've heard some of the horrendous stories, and some are written about a couple of incidents, like some of the severe consequences. And then healthcare is interconnected. An example in there I'll just use, Justin, is we often hear about the backlog of the emergency departments or the difficulty getting into emergencies, a tie-up of acute care beds. This Auditor General's team identifies in one case where 91 personal care home residents were sent to emergency, and the personal care homes refused to take them back. So the emergency department can't turn these seniors or people with disabilities out on the street, so they get tied up in their emergency beds, or then get admitted into our acute care system and tie up acute care beds.
To Labrador, where a women-led grassroots effort in Shehajit Innu First Nation is leading to action on the Innu community's drug and overdose crisis. On March 24th, dozens of community members gathered in Shehajit to discuss the drug and overdose crisis gripping the community. The initiative, led by women in the community, was welcomed by band council members, including Chief Eugene Hart and Innu Nation representatives. After the meeting, the council established checkpoints at the 2 entrances to the community where security officers who've been given authority to deny anyone they deem a threat to the community. Non-Innu visitors to Shehajit are now required to sign in and out at the checkpoints. But the effort didn't end there. On Friday, I spoke with reporter Heidi Adder, who has published 3 stories for The Independent on the effort in Shehajit, to bring us up to speed on the situation. She joined us from Rigolet, Nunatsiavut.
So when it came to the following day, it was a group of more than a dozen people went door to door, including Chief Eugene Hart. Now, these people knocked very kindly on the doors. They didn't have RCMP with them, and they simply told the people, we know what you're doing. It's a small community. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows what everyone is up to. And they simply explained, like, look, we can't take this anymore. We're losing Innu. We're losing the next generation. We're losing too many people to these illicit drugs. And they requested that they leave. And some people, they escorted out of the community. We know that at least 2 people who were involved with illicit drugs were escorted out of Shehajit Innu First Nation and have not been allowed back since that day. And they estimate about 26 people are involved with the drug trade in Shehajit Innu First Nation. So while 2 out of 26 may seem like a small number to start with, it was a huge step and looked at as such a beautiful beginning, because it was less than 24 hours after that first meeting when this was happening. So it was looked at as a beautiful beginning. And when they were going door to door, they talked to people about the resources on, if you want to stay in this community and you want to get clean, here's what we have for you. Shehajit Innu First Nation runs their own treatment center at a former Christian youth camp. They have the Charles J. Andrew Treatment Center right on the reserve. There are resources that are sometimes it's overwhelming to try to access though. So with some of the people that they knocked on the doors with, they sat down and they had those discussions of, if you want to stay here, if you want to be a part of this community, you need to get sober. And some people, we spoke to one woman who was a former drug dealer, her and her partner were, and she explained how she was upset when they knocked on her door. She was incredibly upset that they told her partner to leave, but it was a wake-up call. And now her and her partner are both in treatment for their addictions for the past that led up to this point. So within this 24-hour window, the Innu First Nation was able to escort people out, get people into treatment, and work with the RCMP to have a better understanding of what the Innu want and need and what the RCMP need to be able to do their jobs.
Now, some of the Innu women you spoke with, like Florence Milley and Yvette Michelle, they really stressed that they need to take a compassionate approach, especially with folks who know that they want to get help. Can you contextualize that a little bit and tell maybe our viewers what is important for non-Innu folks to know, to understand about the drug crisis in Shehajit?
It was only about 60 years ago that almost all Innu were living on the land. It was only 60 years. That's not even a retirement age for majority of people these days. 60 years ago, they were living on the land and living a completely different life. When you look at the impacts of colonialism on the Innu, it was so much change so quickly. So because of that, there is a number of people affected by intergenerational trauma. If there aren't the resources in a community to face trauma head on and to help people overcome trauma and look at options for the future, people are going to turn to those substances. This is what Florence and Yvette Michelle explained. When people turn to those substances to numb all of the trauma that they have experienced and how quickly things have changed and all of the effects from this, that's where As one person mentioned, Shaji is seen as a gold mine for drug dealers because it has so many people deeply affected by trauma, so many people looking to numb the past and what they are going through, that illicit drugs has become so common. One of the people that we spoke to mentioned teenagers shooting up outside of the school, kids as young as 10 drinking. It's a result. They explained that it's a result of all of that trauma, all of that intergenerational trauma. And you can't help people get clean and make a better future if you shame them, if you treat them terribly, if you don't understand what led to this point. So Yvette Michelle and Florence Milley highlighted how compassion is needed because they're not looking at, let's throw all these people in jail. Because what does that actually solve? They would serve their time and they would be released. And if there isn't healing for trauma and employment opportunities, they're probably going to go right back to that drug trade. So they explain that with compassion, the Innu can actually create this beautiful future, create a future where people don't need to numb themselves with illicit drugs, where people are able to understand the past traumas, able to cope with the past traumas, and look to the future with some hope. So that compassion is a result of understanding all of the trauma that Innu have been through in the past 60 years and more, and realizing that if they want a better community and pushing for a better community, it's not going to come from shame. It's not going to come from throwing people in jail. It's going to come from compassion and care for all Innu and treating them as the humans that they are and trying to help them become the better people that they want to be. That's what Florence and Yvette truly believe, and the entire community is truly pushing for.
To the island's west coast now, where the city of Corner Brook has officially made public transit free for an estimated 1,500 eligible residents. On Tuesday, the city announced it's offering free bus passes to residents who receive income support, youth receiving youth services, and seniors receiving the Guaranteed Income Supplement. The program includes provincial funding and comes after the city's recent doubling of bus capacity and its introduction of a new user-friendly payment system. This is City of Corner Brook Manager of Engineering, Aaron O'Brien.
So our agreement with the province is a 1-year pilot program, is the way it's worded. There are other municipalities such as St. John's who have been doing this pilot program for 5 or 6 years. So it's, we're going to monitor it, look at how it rolls out. But with good uptake, we're very hopeful that it's a long-term program.
On Thursday, Newfoundland and Labrador marked the centennial anniversary of women's right to vote. On April 3rd, 1925, women gained the right to vote and hold public office for the first time, a hard-fought win by suffragists who for years advocated for women's right to political life in what was then the Dominion of Newfoundland. The first general election women were allowed to vote in was held in 1928, when 90% of eligible women voters cast their ballots. And Inuk soprano Diantha Edmonds has become the first Indigenous woman to win the Juno Award for Classical Composition of the Year. The Junos were held last week in Vancouver, where Edmonds took home the award for her piece Ang Malukisa. On Tuesday, Nunatsiavut President Johannes Lamp called Edmonds' achievement an inspiration to many. He said her, quote, dedication and artistry not only highlight the rich cultural heritage of Labrador Inuit, but also pave the way for future generations of Indigenous artists. That's it for this inaugural episode of the Indy broadcast. You can find our stories, podcasts, and more at theindependent.ca. I'm Justin Brake. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.